Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Let's Combinate. I am joined once again by Aaron Snyder, who is the creator of Quality Systems Explained on YouTube. He's now a consultant and a sharp mind in the world of regulated quality systems. The last interview that we did a couple of months ago, he was going through kappa versus deviations, mentioned that we were going to go in that direction as we were preparing for the episode. And so, definitely somebody to follow on YouTube if you don't already. Today, we're getting into the backbone of compliance, and that is documentation. I wanted to talk to Aaron about how regulations fit together in terms of a hierarchy, and then some good practices he's seen in the document management space. If you work in quality, probably one of the most important topics to understand, regardless of what function you work in. Aaron, maybe talk about where documentation fits in to quality systems generally speaking. I know it's one of the it's probably the first system you have to implement if you are going from zero to, if you have a greenfield site, let's say new company, you need to have a documentation system before you do anything. If it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. Maybe talk about the ICH-Q10 versus the device attitudes, if there are any differences or if they're exactly the same.
When you look at the actual requirements themselves, whether it's regulation, whatever the legislative body will pass a law, that law is translated into a regulation. For us on the medical device side, it's 21 CFR 820. And in 21 CFR 820, it has a section 820.40 for document controls. All right. Your quality system itself is defined in documentation, right? You don't have a quality system if you don't have documented policies, procedures, work instructions, forms, templates, whatever they are. You have that standard ISO pyramid that has the policy at the top, then it has SOPs, then it has work instructions, and then it has forms, and then at the very bottom of the pyramid, you have the records.
Is that actually in an ISO standard?
Yeah, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but that standard document pyramid that you see, it's like 10,000 something. There is an ISO document that kind of outlines the general documentation architecture. At least that's my understanding of it. I may be wrong, but that's where I think that comes from.
Okay. On you go.
Yeah, you have this standard policy, procedure, work instruction. A lot of companies will put the procedure and the work instruction together, which can cause problems because they do different things. And then you have the forms and templates and the records at the bottom. So, at its basic fundamental part, your quality manual, which is a requirement in 1345, not a requirement in the QSR, so the 1996 QS Reg for 820. But now that they're adopting 1345, adopting incorporation by reference, for there will be a requirement to have that quality manual. Your policy should be your quality manual. It should define the high level requirements for all of your quality processes and outline how those processes interact, how they feed into each other, and all of that stuff. So that's outlined in the quality manual, which is your highest level policy. Now, when you get into a bigger organization, say a Pfizer, say a J&J, you are going to have corporate policies. You may have a policy for IT infrastructure, for software validation, for security. You may have a policy for document control. And that policy is kind of defining the minimum requirements for the company. That includes regulatory requirements, it includes company specific requirements, or jurisdiction. There could be some local regulatory requirements from wherever you're working, the state of Florida or France. So you put all those requirements together into that policy. The policy is just like laying the foundation. It's just telling you what's the minimum of what we need to do. When you get into that SOP, the SOP defines also what you need to do in more detail. So if you're going to do process validation, the SOP will say, okay, we're going to validate processes. How we're going to validate our processes is we're going to do an IQ, OQ, PQ. And in the IQ, OQ, PQ, we're going to have these minimum things in there. It'll be reviewed and approved by these groups, right? The next level down from that standard operating procedure or SOP, whatever we want to call it, work instruction. The work instruction is much more detailed. So the work instruction is the step by step execution of that process. So the SOP for process validation said IQ, OQ, PQ, they have to have these minimum things in it. The work instruction is going to say, okay, you're going to write a protocol. The protocol is going to have these sections. You're going to use this template. These groups are going to approve it. Once it's approved, you're going to execute it. Once you execute it, it's much more detailed. Where companies get in trouble with their documentation is when they blend SOP and work instruction. So they can be too specific in a higher level document, or you can be too vague in a lower level document. And both of those can cause separate problems for the organization. I hope that kind of laid the foundation. There's a lot there. We can talk about all kinds of stuff in that.
And so, as you began to talk, I found ISO 10013, which is Quality Management Systems Guidance for Documented Information. The standard
Yeah.
provides guidance on development, implementation, maintenance, and improvement of documentation to support a QMS. It explicitly discusses document hierarchy.
Funny
Yeah,
enough,
so that's really
that
cool.
funny enough, that was a supporting external document that I had on my external document list at one of the companies I worked at. So I said, okay, I'd never seen this before. I need a copy so I can read it and make sure we're following it. And they're like, we don't have a copy. So that's why when you asked, is it actually in the standard? I was like, I think it is, but I actually haven't gone through it because they didn't have a copy.
I know a standard exists.
I don't know what's in it.
Now, what are the issues that can happen? Because I have seen SOPs at the execution level.
Right.
And I know sometimes people like try and distinguish between who, what, where, when, why, and they use those kinds of words to distinguish what
Yep.
should be in a policy versus a standard versus an SOP. But the devil's advocate in me wants to say, so long as it's documented, who cares?
Oh,
What's a problem with me saying it needs to be approved by validation and QA, and the protocol needs to include the following: click here, press there, type here, etc. And I'm sure you've seen this before, but a lot of work instructions too in the validated electronic systems, they're
yeah.
literally like click here, if this pop-up comes up,
Right.
type
Yep.
in here. And so that is definitely maybe too detailed for an SOP, but there are some things that are a judgment call.
So with that, you have to ask yourself, where do I need a work instruction versus where can I get away with just an SOP? That is totally dependent on your organization, the size, the number of groups involved, whether you're using an electronic system or not. The easiest place to get into a work instruction versus an SOP is if you have an electronic tool for document control. Okay. So I have master control or I have TrackWise for document control. All right. I'm going to have a procedure that tells me here are the groups that are working in master control, or here are the roles or the functions, and here's what they do, and here are the requirements for doc control. But then I'm going to have a work instruction, like you said, that has screenshots and says when you want to create a new document, you log in, you click on this button, this comes up, you enter the information, you hit the next. So it's screenshots and it's arrows and it's enter this and this information. So in those instances where you do have an electronic tool, whether it is master control, TrackWise, ETQ, Agile, Arena, PLM, I know there's so many of them now. The work
Etc.
instruction goes along with how you actually open a kappa and advance it through the steps. But the procedure just tells you what you're doing when you have a kappa. Like when do you open a kappa? Who has to be notified? How does it fed into management review? What are my steps? Investigation tools, those types of things. So it is really apparent that you have the procedure, then you have the work instruction because you have a tool and it tells you how to use the tool. Now, there are areas where you don't need a work instruction. Internal audit. A procedure should be fine because one person or one group is probably following that, as in the quality group is following the internal audit procedure. They have to notify the auditee, they have to write a report, they have to issue the report. Why would you need a work instruction for that? You could have an electronic tool, but you could work some of that detail into the procedure if you wanted to. Now, I think it is dangerous to get too detailed in a procedure because you're really procedure should be what to do, work instruction should be how to do it. So think about it as what to do, how to do it.
One thing that I've seen as maybe an issue is I don't know if it's an issue. Conceptually, what I've seen in audits is documentation and training are tied together at the
Yes.
hip. And then when we talk about combination products, medical devices, and so on, competence is something that is hard coded into our version of the regs where it's not as encoded in 210, 211. Maybe if you could talk about the link between documentation and training, because I
Yeah.
think the difficulty, and I've obviously worked with controlled documents and et cetera, but I've never
Hmm.
been like document control manager. But it becomes really complicated when you have SOP and work instructions. If I need to be trained for awareness as a Kappa approver, dealing with the curriculums, roles and responsibilities, and training impact assessments, and all that is so much nuance and back end to doc management that yeah, actually, now that I've gone on a bit of a thought, I
You're
want to go
walking right
back.
through it.
If you could talk about the foundations of document management in ISO as a
Super fair.
minimum, what do you need to do to establish a documentation system?
So within your document control, the most important aspect of the quality system is document what you do, what you document. So you say what you're going to do, then you do it. Produce records that show that you did it. So that when someone comes in and audits you, you can say, yeah, here's a record. I followed my process. You need to show that you followed your process. And your process needs to be defined and approved before you follow it, right? So we define the process, we approve the document, then we train the required people, and then they follow the process, they produce the records. Okay. So at its simplest part, document control is reviewing and approving our processes, okay, putting a revision control on them, okay, making those documents available at their point of use. We used to all be hard copies. Now, for the most part, most people have electronic quality system for document control. Okay, so you're making those documents available for review at their points of use. And then you have to have a mechanism for updating those documents, review and approval before they are used. So revision control, change control. The core part of change control is actually in the document control system because when you make a change in your quality system, you're changing a document. Whether it's a process change or a product change, a document. Could be a work instruction. It could be a drawing. It could be a raw material. It could be a supplier form, supplier quality something, right? It's still a document. So you're going to review that change, make the change, send it out to review to some people. They're going to review it, they're going to approve it, and then you implement it. Now, you got into training, that's the implementation part of it, making sure people are trained on the updated. Let's just say that every company struggles with training from the smallest to the biggest. It's much more difficult in the bigger companies because you have so many more people, documents, the review and approval of those changes and getting people to train to those documents is that much more challenging. So, at its face, document control is review and approve our process, follow our process, update our process, review and approve again, and then implement and then continue on. If you come into an organization and you get a list of their documents and the current revision and the date the change was made, and they're not updating their documents, say they haven't changed their documents in a couple of years, that quality system is probably got some problems because if you're using your documents, you're identifying problems that need to be corrected.
And so could you maybe double click on that? Like you're saying that if you get a document list and everything is like every SOP hasn't been updated in the last 12 months, that's
Hmm.
a sign that maybe there's some issues. Switching gears a little bit to audit readiness, inspection readiness, whatever.
Yeah.
What do you think are the most overlooked parts of document control and where do people end up having the most issues and findings? Because it's usually not in the did you have a documented process and did you at least try to follow that documented process? That's usually not the issue.
Whenever I train GMPs for medical devices, I always ask a question. Would you rather have a procedure that meets all the regulatory requirements and you don't follow it, or procedure that might not meet the regulatory requirements, but I follow it? Which one's better? different depending on where you sit in the organization, whether you're at the top or the bottom. But it's a good thought exercise to think about that. So my procedure meets the requirements, I don't follow it. My procedure doesn't meet the requirements, but I follow it. Which one of those is easier to fix?
The one where you are following it.
If you have a behavior, a mindset within your organization that we follow our documentation, it's easy to update that and they will continue the behavior of following that documentation. If I'm in an organization where they just don't follow my procedures or they're just there for the auditor, yeah, it looks great, but getting people to follow it, that's culture change. That's really hard to do, especially when the executives aren't on board. So to come back to your question, I think where most companies miss their documentation is definitely roles and responsibilities. Who's doing what? When do they do it? Who do they communicate with? And there's a tool out there called RACI matrix, roles and responsibility matrix, that I found they can be difficult to build, but as you build them, you will find problems in your procedure and correct those before you implement it. The RACI matrices are very helpful. There are rules that you have to follow. Where people struggle with RACI matrices is they don't follow the rules. And we could talk about that on another. So definitely roles and responsibilities is like every everywhere I've worked, they have poor defined roles and responsibilities.
So you've never seen
Sec,
them defined?
I've seen them defined in a document or some group has their suite of documents and they do a good job. But generally within the quality system,
If you
it's
zoom all the way
really
out.
poor. When I was at Fresenius,
I do want to dive into that, but keep going. When you were at FK,
yeah, so when I was at Cabby, I was the head of quality assurance for a manufacturing facility. And our documentation, the roles and responsibilities were not defined well. So people didn't know what they were supposed to do. This happened to me at Waters. It happened to me at Covidian. It happened to me at some other stops that I've been. And individuals, whether they're from operations, engineering, or whatever, they'll come to quality and they'll be like, hey, we have this problem. What should we do? And I'm like, follow your procedure. And they're like, I don't know what the procedure says. I'm like, why don't you go get it and read it? I'm going to have to go get it and read it. I probably know what you're supposed to do, but me telling you is not helping you become more efficient at your job. I shouldn't be in that situation where I have to tell you how
check
to
the
do
checker.
your and that question itself is highlighting multiple deficiencies in your quality system. First, they weren't trained properly. Second, the procedure is probably not clear, or the roles and responsibilities are not delineated well enough for someone to understand what they need to do. Now, it could be a third thing. Maybe they know what they need to do and they don't want to do it. They're looking for a shortcut, which that happens. Okay. So, roles and responsibilities difficult to do because it takes a lot of thought and up front and you got to talk to the various, especially if there are multiple groups involved. If you start to build that roles and responsibilities matrix and you say Aaron is accountable for this, but he's not doing the work. He's doing the work. We're in different teams, right? If I'm accountable but you're doing the work, okay, how am I communicating with you to make sure the work's done, right? Then you have the consulted and informed. Okay, so people that you have to consult, they're approving the work. Okay, a lot of times people think that, oh, I just have to go ask them for feedback. No, the consult is an approval. Informed is just telling you at the end of the process what happened. Accountable has to make sure the work is done. Responsible is the person doing the work. You can only have one A, you can only have one R in a row. Only one A, only one R in a row. If you have two A's, not going to work. If you have two R's, not going to work. It's telling you that your step is too big. So you may have to shrink the step or simplify the process.
Now, the question that I was going to ask earlier was around how do you slice and dice it? Because a lot of big companies have matrixed organizations and
Mm-hmm.
structures, et cetera, and
Right.
they'll use there's usually inconsistency where some SOPs may be role based, where they'll say quality, regulatory, whatever, high level, not speaking to individual groups, specific functions. Others will say procurement, they'll say global procurement services, and then they'll
Right.
say design quality, and you may have anyways, I'm maybe illustrating this in not as
No, you're
basically okay.
you're doing
I'll
good.
ask a question. Yeah, yeah. You have some SOPs where, regardless of my reporting line, so long as I have the curriculum and I'm competent and I'm trained, I can do the quality role regardless of who I report to.
Yeah.
And in other situations, it's saying no, it's only site quality engineering can do this role or whatever. Like some specific external party quality assurance
Yeah.
can only do this role. Which do you favor? Because otherwise you are inconsistent. I think in an ideal world, I haven't seen it yet to your point, but in an ideal world, all of them would be written in the same way.
So when you start to remediate your document, this is where your standardization within your quality system needs to be, but also flexibility. And it's not easy. And what I mean by that is your document control, you are going to have templates for how your policy is configured, how your work instruction is configured, how your SOP is configured. Whether it's section one is the purpose, section two is sometimes you have purpose, then you have scope, then you
Scope,
have definitions, then you have roles and
roles and responsibilities.
responsibilities, a process map. You got to get a process map in there. If not, your procedure's weak if you don't have a process map. Then you have the actual procedure section, and then you have appendices. The procedure itself could be multiple sections, section 6, section 7, section 8. What I normally do, and normally I'm remediating, besides when I went to Allotex, I got to create the documents and it was way easier then. But normally you're working with an existing document. So you update the document, and then once you have the procedure set, I will normally copy that procedure, put it in another Word document, and then I will go to the roles and responsibilities section and go, okay, section 6.1, who's accountable? And you may say quality's accountable. I say, great. I put a column in there for quality. Who's doing the work? The quality engineer is doing the work. The R goes in the quality engineer column. Who has to approve it? Operations and quality. I put this operations column in there and put a C. I do that for 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, all the way down till I'm done with the process. Okay. Doing that, you will identify all the groups because every time you identify a new group, you're going to add a column. Once you get to the end, you may have a set of groups and a set of roles. Okay. Sometimes you separate those. Other times you leave it together. It's a preference thing at that point. And you can have procedures that have multiple RACI tables in it. You could have a table for, okay, when a kappa is opened, I have a kappa owner. I have a kappa coach. I have a kappa team. So I have these individual roles, and the process has the groups and who's responsible for what, how communication. And in some documents, say I just revised a calibration procedure, like there is a step in the process that says, okay, if you look at the calibration label and it's outside its calibration period, you have to notify QA and the calibration team. Okay. Who's responsible for doing that? Everyone in the company. Everyone in the company, if you look at a calibration label and it's out of calibration, you have to tell quality and or you could make it an or and or calibration team. Okay. So then you're going to have a column in your table that says all personnel. And then if you build that table correctly, it's going to help you identify who has to be trained on the document.
So you do that for every SOP, right?
I do that for every SOP and every work instruction. And what it does is it forces you to remove complexity. It forces you to improve how you communicate the procedure itself. So it identifies which groups have to be trained, what work they're doing. And it takes out the kind of, I don't know,
It's
it's
like
at,
the Spider-Man standoff.
if you have three groups that all have work to do on that step, you've got three R's. Then I could say, oh, it's not me. Shibby's going to do it. And you could say, it's not me. Alan's going to do it. And Alan's, no, it's not me. Aaron's going to do it. And then the work doesn't get done because we're all pointing at each other. So it's the Spider-Man meme.
Yeah, I have seen situations before where it wasn't super clear, or you have two SOPs that are not exactly talking to each other, and oh,
Yep.
I thought you were going to do it, and no, I thought you were going to do it. No, you were supposed to do it. It's guys, it's very clearly not identified. It just says it needs to get done, not who needs to do it. So the RACI approach, even if you do it outside of the SOP as part of the writing exercise, really will help make that easier. If quality is responsible, but quality engineering is though, if quality is accountable, if you zoom in, quality engineering is responsible, then it's a judgment call you have to make to what extent you define. Aaron, where can people find you?
So I have my YouTube channel. You can check me out there, Quality Systems Explained, and working on my website. It'll be up soon, hopefully. So QMS remediation, training, do coaching and mentoring, and then on LinkedIn, look me up, Aaron Snyder on LinkedIn there. And if you send me a message, put AA Ron in there, and we'll be good. My friends over at Key and Peel gave me a gift there.
Thanks for coming out again.